The surprise arrival. Simon had always been an ordinary man with ordinary dreams. He was a man of simple pleasures, content with the small things in life. So when he married Amora, a woman whose calm demeanor and mysterious allure seemed like something out of a dream, he thought he had found his perfect match. Amora, with her soft smile and reserved nature, was everything he had ever wanted, and together they built a life he could look forward to. Their new home, nestled in a quiet corner of town, was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful. It was a fresh start, until one unexpected discovery turned everything upside down. As they unpacked in the new house, Amora casually mentioned her pet snake, Zara. Simon froze in place, the words taking a moment to sink in. Zara, he repeated, incredulously. Amora smiled gently, revealing a small cage in the corner of their bedroom. Zara is my spiritual companion, she explained, her eyes glinting with something he hadn't yet seen in her, passion. Before Simon could process this new revelation, Amora opened the cage. Out slithered Zara, a sleek, black snake that seemed to move with an unsettling grace. Simon's heart raced as he took a step back. His stomach churned with disgust and fear. You're not serious, right? He stammered, watching Zara with wide eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that this creature wasn't just any pet, it was something more, something otherworldly. Amora, however, appeared completely unfazed. Zara has been with me since childhood, she said, her voice soft but firm. She's part of my spirit. My grandmother gave her to me as a protector and guide. She's not a normal pet. Simon struggled to find words. His fear was palpable, his hands trembling as he looked at the snake. But it's a snake. It's dangerous, he blurted, his voice shaky. No, Simon, Amora replied, her tone unwavering. Zara is not dangerous. She is a gift. She's a protector. The unease in Simon's chest grew as Amora's attachment to Zara became clear. It wasn't just a pet, it was something far deeper, something spiritual. Amora insisted Zara would always be part of their lives, no matter what. Simon, despite his growing panic, reluctantly agreed to let Zara stay, but only under one condition: the snake must stay in its cage, always. Tension filled the air as Amora agreed, but Simon could feel the weight of something unspoken between them. This was just the beginning of something far more complicated than he ever could have imagined. The bond grows. As the months passed, life in their new home began to settle into a routine. Simon tried his best to adjust to the strange new reality of sharing his space with a snake. While he had agreed to Zara's presence, the unease never quite left him. The more he tried to dismiss his growing discomfort, the more he felt like something was wrong. It started with small things, odd behaviors that Simon couldn't easily explain. Zara would slither from room to room, but more often than not, she ended up in the living room, where Simon liked to spend his evenings alone. It was as though the snake was deliberately seeking him out. Every time Simon sat down to relax, there Zara would be, silently coiling on the floor or resting nearby, her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. At first, Simon convinced himself it was just his imagination. But over time, he couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that came with Zara's unblinking stare. It was as though the snake was watching his every move, studying him in a way that was too deliberate to be natural. Simon began to feel a strange pressure in his chest when Zara was nearby, as if the snake was silently judging him, assessing his every action. The worst part was, no matter how much he tried to shake it off, he could never escape the sensation that something was wrong. Whenever Simon voiced his concerns to Amora, she would smile reassuringly and place a hand on his shoulder. Zara is just watching over you, she would say, her voice soft but confident. She's a protector. She can sense things you can't. She watches over our home and, more importantly, over us. But she stares at me like she's studying me, Simon would reply, his unease creeping into his voice. Amora would laugh lightly, dismissing his worries with a soft kiss on the cheek. Zora can read emotions. She can feel what's going on inside us. If she's staring at you, it means she's protecting you, understanding you. You're safe, Simon. Despite her comforting words, Simon couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each night as he sat in his favorite chair, the weight of Zora's gaze pressed against him. It was hard to focus on anything else when her dark, emotionless eyes seemed to follow every movement he made. No matter how many times Amora reassured him, Simon couldn't help but feel like Zora was always just a little too close, her presence always too overpowering. Still, Simon didn't want to upset Amora. He didn't want to create conflict over something so strange and unusual. He tried to push down his growing discomfort, but each time Zora came near, it became harder to ignore the nagging feeling that there was something about the snake, something about Zora, that wasn't entirely normal. The bond between Amora and Zora seemed to deepen, but Simon found himself more and more isolated in his own home, unable to shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. The mysterious disappearance. The morning started like any other, with sunlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows in their quiet home. But then, Simon was jolted awake by the sound of someone crying. It was Mrs. Amina, their elderly neighbor, and she was hysterical. Simon quickly dressed and rushed over to her house, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived, Mrs. Amina was standing in her front yard, clutching her hands together as if trying to hold herself together. "Idris," she gasped between sobs, "my boy, he's gone. He was here last night, but now, he's just gone." The whole neighborhood was in a state of panic. People gathered in small groups, whispering, speculating about what could have happened. Idris, a bright and energetic child, was nowhere to be found. As the search began, Simon could feel the weight of the unease settle over the streets. Rumors quickly began to swirl, and some of the whispers became darker. A few neighbors, their faces twisted with fear, started muttering about Zora. "The snake," one woman said in a hushed voice. "It's not right. There's something about that snake. It's dangerous." Simon's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Zora's name. He tried to dismiss the thought, but the connection was hard to ignore. Zora had been acting strange lately, slithering around the house, avoiding food for days at a time. And now, a child was missing. Could the two be connected? When Simon returned home, he found Amora in their living room, her calm demeanor almost unsettling against the backdrop of the neighborhood's growing panic. She was sitting near Zora's cage, her fingers gently brushing the glass. Zora, as usual, was coiled within, watching them with those deep, knowing eyes. "Amora, have you heard?" Simon asked, his voice tight with worry. "Idris is missing. Mrs. Amina is beside herself. The whole neighborhood is in chaos." Amora looked up, her face softening in sympathy. "Yes, I heard," she said, her tone almost too serene for the situation. "I'm sure he'll be found. He's just run off somewhere, that's all. It happens sometimes with kids." "But people are saying strange things," Simon pressed, his brow furrowing. "Some think Zora might have something to do with it. They are scared, Amora." Amora's eyes flashed with a fierce protectiveness. "Zora would never hurt anyone," she said, her voice firm, almost defensive. "She's not like that. You know her better than that." Simon's heart raced. He could feel the growing sense of unease gnawing at him. He had always trusted Amora, but something about the way she spoke, the intensity in her defense of Zora, unsettled him. He had seen Zora's strange behavior in the past, how she avoided food, how she always seemed to be observing, never quite fitting into the natural rhythm of their home. Still, Amora continued, as if trying to convince herself more than Simon. "Zora has never done anything wrong. She's my protector. She would never harm anyone. Simon wanted to believe her, but doubts were creeping in. The missing child, the rumors, Zora's odd behavior, it all felt connected, and yet Amora seemed to be hiding something. As he watched her, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Zora's presence in their home, something that neither of them had fully understood. Days passed, and the search for Idris continued, but no trace of him was found. Meanwhile, Zora's strange behavior only intensified. She refused to eat, her eyes always watching Simon with a knowing gaze that sent chills down his spine. It was as if the snake was waiting for something. Waiting for him to do something, or perhaps for him to understand something that he couldn't yet see. Simon's fears began to grow, and with them, his suspicion that Amora might be keeping something from him. Was Zora truly just a protector, as Amora insisted, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? Tension built. As the days stretched on, the mood in the neighborhood grew darker, and so did the tension in Simon's home. The search for Idris had turned up nothing, and every time Simon stepped outside, he could feel the whispers and glances of the neighbors. They were all looking for someone to blame, and Zora's name had become the talk of the town. Inside the house, Simon felt the weight of those rumors pressing down on him. The unease he had felt at first, about Zora, about Amora's strange attachment to the snake, was no longer something he could push aside. Each day, Zora's behavior seemed to grow more peculiar. She no longer interacted with Simon at all, always slinking away when he entered the room, as though she was intentionally avoiding him. But when Amora was around, Zora would be right there, coiling herself around Amora's feet, watching her with an almost reverent gaze. This subtle but growing divide between Simon and Amora gnawed at him. Every time he saw the way Zora would curl up beside her, he felt more and more like an outsider in his own home. He couldn't shake the feeling that the snake was some kind of force that was slowly pulling Amora away from him. It was as if Zora had become a barrier between them, something that Simon couldn't cross. The frustration built within him, turning into an undercurrent of resentment. He had never been one to confront his problems head-on, but now, it felt like everything was crashing down around him. The house that once felt like a peaceful haven now felt suffocating. He couldn't escape the thought that Zora was more than just a pet, a presence that was somehow manipulating his life, keeping him and Amora apart. Simon's days were growing harder. At work, his mind was constantly elsewhere. He found himself unable to focus, his thoughts consumed with the mystery surrounding Zora and Amora's increasingly strange behavior. He had always been a dedicated worker, but now his performance was slipping. His colleagues began to notice his odd, distracted demeanor. "Everything okay, Simon?" one of them asked with concern. But Simon just shrugged, unsure of what to say. How could he explain what was happening in his own home when he wasn't sure himself? At home, things weren't any better. Simon's conversations with Amora were few and far between. She was often lost in her own world, spending more time with Zora than with him. The connection they once shared seemed to be dissolving, replaced by an invisible wedge that Simon could never quite reach. Whenever he tried to talk to her about the snake or his concerns, she would brush him off, telling him he was just being paranoid. But in his heart, Simon knew that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the strange behavior of Zora, it was the way Amora had changed. It was as though the snake had taken hold of her, and Simon was now an outsider in the life they had once shared. His nights were the worst. Lying awake in bed, Simon would listen to the soft hiss of Zora, who seemed to always be near, her presence a constant reminder of the distance growing between him and his wife. He wondered, with growing dread, if Zora was more than just a snake. Was she a force of influence, something dark and unknowable that had come between them? Had Amora's attachment to the creature gone too far? The strain in their relationship became unbearable. Simon couldn't stop questioning Amora's devotion to Zora, wondering if the snake was somehow controlling her, pushing him out of her life. He had tried to understand, to accept that Zora was important to Amora, but as the days went by, the mystery deepened, and the feeling of isolation grew stronger. The more Simon thought about it, the more he feared that whatever was happening in their home, he might be losing his wife to something he couldn't understand, or to someone who wasn't even human. The truth unfolds. The days seemed to drag on, and Simon's frustration reached a boiling point. His mind was consumed by the idea that Zora had somehow taken control of his life, twisting his reality and pulling his wife further away from him. But despite his growing unease, Simon still couldn't find the courage to confront Amora directly. It wasn't just Zora, it was the way Amora seemed to shield the snake, the way her attachment had deepened over time. Simon didn't know how to fight something so intangible. One afternoon, at work, Simon was called into his boss's office. Mr. Coffey, a kind but direct man, had a concerned expression on his face as Simon walked in. "Simon, I've been noticing you've been off lately," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Your performance has slipped, and you seem distracted. I just want to check in with you. Is everything okay?" Simon stood there for a moment, unsure of how to explain the spiraling chaos in his life. He hadn't shared the details with anyone, he'd been too ashamed, too confused. But the stress was taking its toll. Finally, he let the words spill out. "I don't know, Mr. Coffey," Simon began, his voice strained. "There's something wrong at home. My wife, she has a pet snake, Zora. And lately, it's like I'm losing her to it. The snake is always around her, and it's like it's watching me. I'm afraid it's more than just a pet. I think it's affecting our relationship." Mr. Coffey listened patiently, his brow furrowing in thought. "It sounds like you're being consumed by this fear, Simon. Whatever is happening with Zora, it's clearly taking a toll on your marriage. My advice? Confront Amora directly. You need to face whatever it is that's causing this. Don't let it fester." The words hit Simon like a lightning bolt. Confront Amora, he had been avoiding this for so long. But now, he realized that his fears had already taken over his life. If he didn't do something soon, he would lose everything. As the conversation ended and Simon left his boss's office, a plan began to form in his mind. He couldn't go on living in fear, letting the tension between him and Amora grow. He needed to confront her about Zora, to face the truth once and for all. He didn't care how much it hurt, he couldn't keep living this way. Simon made up his mind then and there. He would go home early today, and he would finally do what he had been avoiding. No more hesitation. He would speak to Amora, tell her how he felt, and get rid of Zora. For good. His mind raced as he gathered his things and left work. The thought of confronting Amora, of pushing her to face the truth, made his stomach churn, but it was the only way forward. As he drove home, Simon tried to steady his breathing. He had to be strong, even though every part of him was scared. When he stepped through the door, the silence was almost suffocating. Amora was in the living room, as usual, sitting near Zora's cage, her fingers lightly stroking the glass. Zora was there, too, coiled around the cage, her eyes fixed on Simon with an unnerving intensity. Simon took a deep breath. This was it. "Amora," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "We need to talk. About Zora, and about us." Amora turned slowly, her calm expression never faltering. "What's wrong, Simon?" she asked softly, but there was an edge to her voice that Simon couldn't ignore. "I can't keep living like this," Simon said, his heart pounding. "You and Zora. I don't know what's going on, but it's tearing us apart. I need to know the truth. What is this connection you have with that snake? What does she mean to you?" For the first time, Amora's calm exterior cracked just a little. She didn't answer immediately, instead looking down at Zora as if searching for something in the snake's eyes. Simon felt a cold shiver run down his spine. It was as though Zora had all the answers, and Amora was waiting for some sign from her. Finally, Amora spoke, her voice softer than before. Zora isn't just a pet, Simon. She's a part of me. I've always known she was more than just a snake. She's been with me for as long as I can remember, and she's been guiding me. Protecting me. Simon felt a sense of dread settle over him. Guiding you. Protecting you. He repeated, his voice trembling. From what, Amora? What's really going on here? Amora looked up at him, her gaze steady but distant. Zora is part of something much bigger, Simon. She's part of my spirit, part of my life force. I don't expect you to understand, but she's been with me through everything. And now, she's here to protect us both. Simon felt his pulse quicken. He had never seen this side of Amora before, and it terrified him. Was this the truth? Or was something much darker at play? I don't know if I can live like this anymore, Simon said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can live with her, with you. Amora stood up, her eyes locked onto Simon's, her expression unreadable. Then you must decide, Simon. You can either accept Zora as part of our life, or you can leave. But I won't give her up. She is my protector. She always will be. The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating him. Simon didn't know what to do anymore. All he knew was that he was standing at a crossroads, one that would change everything. The final revelation. When Simon returned home that evening, the house felt eerily quiet. The usual hum of life, the soft sounds of Amora moving around, Zora's quiet presence, was gone. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, a silence that seemed to weigh heavily on him. His heart pounded in his chest, and the unease that had been building for months reached a boiling point. Something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to be revealed, something that would change everything. As he walked through the hallway toward the living room, Simon passed by the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, and he heard voices inside. One was Amora's, soft, soothing, but the other was unfamiliar. Curious and uneasy, Simon paused. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. There was an intimacy to the conversation that made Simon's heart race. Slowly, he crept closer, his pulse quickening. His eyes darted toward the bathroom door, and with a trembling hand, he pushed it open just a crack. What he saw inside took his breath away. Amora was in the bathtub, surrounded by steam, but what struck Simon the most was the man sitting beside her. He was tall, with an almost ethereal presence, and his features seemed to shimmer in the light. His face was vaguely human but somehow otherworldly. Simon blinked in disbelief. The man's skin had an almost translucent quality to it, as though he weren't fully of this world. There was no mistaking it, this wasn't just some strange man. This was a spiritual being. Amora, completely at ease, was speaking to him as though this was the most natural thing in the world. And beside her, Zora, her snake, was curled up in the corner of the room, her eyes never leaving Simon. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The realization hit Simon like a punch to the gut. Zora was not just a pet. She was far more than he had ever imagined. Zora wasn't a companion, she was a guardian spirit. And the man in the bathroom, he wasn't human. He was something from the other side, a spiritual manifestation. Simon's breath caught in his throat as everything started to piece together. Zora had never been just a pet. She had always been a bridge between Amora and something far beyond this world. A protector. A conduit. A link to Amora's ancestors, to a world Simon could never comprehend. Amora must have sensed Simon's presence, because she turned and looked at the door, her expression calm but full of understanding. Simon, she began softly, her voice tinged with a sadness Simon hadn't heard before. You were never meant to understand. Simon stepped back, his mind spinning. This wasn't just about a pet. This was something spiritual, something ancient that ran deeper than anything he could grasp. Amora sighed and slowly climbed out of the tub, her eyes fixed on Simon. She was no longer the calm, mysterious woman he had married. She was someone entirely different, someone bound to forces he could never understand. Zora is my protector, Simon. She's not just a snake. She's a spirit, sent to keep me connected to my ancestors. The man you saw, he's my late grandfather. He communicates with me through Zora. Their bond is what has guided me, what has kept me safe. It's far beyond what you can see. Simon's chest tightened, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place, but the truth was too much to bear. So, all this time, Zora wasn't just a pet. She was this spiritual force. And you've been living with this connection. With him. Simon's voice was raw, filled with confusion and pain. Amora nodded, her eyes filled with both sorrow and acceptance. I didn't want you to know, Simon. I didn't want you to see this side of me. But this bond is a part of who I am. I can't break free from it. It's a path I've been on my whole life. Simon took a step back, his mind reeling. The woman he loved, his wife, had been living in a world that was completely foreign to him. And now, he realized, he was standing at a crossroads. Amora's path was a spiritual one, tied to forces that he couldn't even begin to understand. Zara was more than a pet. She was the key to this world, and Simon. Simon had never been a part of it. He felt a tear slip down his cheek, a mixture of heartbreak and frustration. He loved Amora, but this wasn't a life he could share. He couldn't accept the strange, otherworldly bond she had with Zora, and he couldn't live in a world where he was an outsider to the very person he had married. The silence between them stretched, and Simon finally spoke, his voice shaking. I don't know what to do with this, Amora. I don't know how to live with you in this world. Amora looked at him with a sorrowful smile, her voice soft. I know, Simon. I never expected you to understand. But this is who I am. Zora and I, we are bound by something far greater than love. You have to decide, Simon. You can either accept this and stay, or you can leave. Simon's heart shattered as the word sank in. He loved Amora, but he could not live in her world. He could not live with Zora, with the spirit that had taken root in his home, in his marriage. I can't, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I can't stay. With a heavy heart, Simon turned and walked away, leaving the woman he had once loved, leaving the house that had once been his home. He left behind the strange world that had consumed his marriage, and as he stepped into the night, he wondered if he would ever truly understand what had happened between him and Amora. The story ends with Simon's final question, one that echoed in his mind as he walked away. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done?